good evening, afternoon, day, morning to everybody. My name is Yoav, and I welcome you, ladies and gentlemen, young women and young men, to our webinar on Honduras. This webinar is organized by the Latin America Solidarity Coalition of Western Mass and the Massachusetts Peace Action MAPA. Thank you for everyone who helped organize this webinar. Special thanks to our speakers, Dr. Rony Castillo, Karen Spring, and my friend, Dr. Adrian Pine. I want to draw your attention to another webinar which is organized by MAPA on the US role in the Bolivia coup and what it means for Latin America. The speaker is Dr. Mark Weisbord. If you live in Western Massachusetts, I encourage you to join our group, the Latin America Solidarity Coalition. And if you live anywhere in New England, you're welcome to join MAPA. Feel free to send me an email if you are interested to join or you're interested to get more information. Our webinar today has two parts. In the first part, each speaker will talk for about 20 minutes, and then we will have half an hour of Q&A. The first speaker will be Rony Castillo, then Karen, and then Adrian. So, Rony Castillo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this invitation. Thanks to Latin American Working Group Massachusetts Peace Action and Latin American Solidarity Coalition too, for organizing this conversation. I'm very glad to share this space with two gorgeous and fighter women, Adrian Pine and Karen Spring. And thank to all who have joined this conversation and stand with us in this fight. I would like to start like saying that main problem that Garifuna people are facing today in Honduras is an institutional racism and genocidal plan against these people, against our people. This is so reflected by a systematic policy of disposition and bloody displacement that we know that this is we can call it like a colonial legacy, you know, this is a colonial legacy. This colonial structure is displayed in the fact that the territory occupied by our people, by Garifuna, in this case, Garifuna, but indigenous people too, are considered as empty spaces, just to borrow a word from Charlie Hall, open to conquest and colonization. That means open for businesses, you know. They establish our land as open for business, open for them. This land have been taken from the communities and hand over, give it to grouping powers in Honduras. We know that this is like open for tourism industry, for oil palm, for mines, for a special development zone that we call sedes or charter city, open also for extractivism. Open, we know that it is open for wherever and whoever, but there is a point in this case that is close, and that is close to our community. Our community doesn't have access to those businesses. That is why the Garifuna, our people, must decide from leaving their community or die. And Garifuna people have been fighting under OFRANEH leadership against this oppression that we call the third expulsion or third disposition, displacement, no, from our land. What is OFRANEH? I would like to talk a little bit. OFRANEH is a grassroots organization that works with more than 48 communities, Garifuna community in Honduras, fighting for their rights, for their territorial rights, and for living, for the right to live in Honduras as indigenous, as Black people. But let's talk a little bit about Garifuna history. What do we call Garifuna people, or Garinagu in our language, in Garifuna language? I would say the origin of the Garifuna peoples dates long before the colonial invasion. We have a Black, and I say Black indigeneity. You know, we are Black, but also we have a indigenous identity. You know, we are like a mixed people between Amerindians who inhabited the region since before colonization, before Columbus arrived this region. From our ancestor, our mothers was Arahuaco and Carina. They're indigenous people from South America, and from Afro-descendant people. I don't like too much talk about Afro-descendant, but I mean in this case, Black people who came to America first as explorers, but also as to be a slave here in America. We know that Garifuna people, after countless resistance struggle to defend our land, their lands in Jurume. Jurume means St. Vincent Island. Jurume in our language, Garifuna, against the European colonizer, mainly against British and French colonizer. That was from 1635 to 1796, approximately, when the Garifuna chief, our leader, Satuye, was assassinated by the British sailor. Then the Garifuna population were taken into custody and sent into Baliso. Baliso is a small island, like 40 miles away from Jurume, from St. Vincent. They remained in Baliso for around 9 months. During that period of time, more than 3,000 Garifuna were poisoned and died on that island. Was the first genocide against Garifuna people. But after that, our people managed to leave the island, and finally they pursued that goal. And like in 1797, they were finally displaced, stripped, and exiled from their territory. And our people ended up by island Roatan, that is now Roatan, island of Roatan in Honduras. Since that, our people, we have communities in different cities in Honduras, different 48 communities in Honduras, but also we have a population in Guatemala, in Nicaragua, in Belize, and now we have an important growing population in the United States, like in New York City, Houston, Seattle, New Orleans, and Los Angeles. You know, when I talk about third expulsion, third expulsion, we need to talk about the first one. But the first expulsion of the Garifuna people was when our father were brought from Africa, from their homeland, to be a slave in America. And the second, when our ancestors were expelled from Jurume, from St. Vincent. And the third one is what is happening now in Honduras, what is happening in our communities now in Honduras. How this expulsion occurred and who has been involved in it? Why do we say that it's systematic genocidal plan against our people? I can set it in 4 important stages. We can talk about 4 important things or time how this expulsion have been occurred in this modern era in Honduras. First, it is why I call 10 years of destruction by the banana companies, by the fruit banana companies in Honduras. That was in the end of 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. They not only took the land for our people, but also attack our humanity as human being. They tried to dehumanize our suffering body, our people. This first moment also includes the genocide that we call San Juan Massacre in 1935, where the dictator, Tiburcio Carillandinos killed more than 20 Garifuna men in cold blood in San Juan, in these communities close to Triunfo de la Cruz in Tela Bay. Now, that the second stage of this displacement, we can call it like when the militarization of the agrarian reform in 17th and 18th, where the military sold the Garifuna land under the legal authorization of the National Agrarian Institute, of the authorization of the state, of the Honduras state, beside with the churches, the Catholic Church also. This sales was made, they sold the Garifuna land to the businessmen from La Palma, from all palms business, and groups related to drug trafficking also in this time. The third stage, I would say, was when the entry of neoliberalism, and when our lands were given to to foreign capital investor that they call investors, mainly to the hotel industry, and the declaration of our territory as protected areas. This was also accompanied by politics of multiculturalism. The era of that allow Garifuna people, the Negro, the Black people, to be part of the government. They deploy some kind of multicultural politics. They give to some people money, and they created some affirmative actions program. I know that those programs were created to simulate like a policy of inclusion, while stripping our community from their territorial land. And the final, and that is the main point here, the entrance of neo-extractivism. I mean by that, the concession and looting of natural resources and common goods by international capital, and even from the state too. I believe this time began with the 2009 coup against Manuel Zelaya. I could also say that this is the most cruel and bloody time in this Garifuna modern time, because hundreds of defenders of land and water were killed. 1,000 more are incarcerated, and more than 40 Garifuna were killed. Most of them, were leaders and defenders of the land. We can see only in 2019, 16 Garifuna people were murdered in their communities by outsider, by some other third party, some other people. And at least 10 of them, 10 Garifuna, have been killed by military, and a little more than 30 have been victim of some armed attack by some state force, by the state force called like police, military, And these years, 2020, five leaders of the Garifuna community have been assassinated, and most recently, that we are facing now, the forced disappearance of the president of the Triunfo de la Cruz, of the community of Triunfo de la Cruz, and 3 other members. That occurred in July 18 this year, when in Triunfo de la Cruz, when approximately 30 men dressed as police entered in the house of these brothers and took them out at gunpoint, took the president of the community first, the Snyder Centeno, and then took out Milton, Swami, and Gerardo. And that day, there was a absolute like curfew. There is no one could circulate that day in Honduras because the pandemic. Only the police could do it, But since that day, nobody knows anything about our people, our brothers. The state always is saying that this disappearance of our people is under investigation, but they are not investigating too much. we know that this issue here is that Snyder was leading a fight against the state of Honduras and against this group of group in power in Bahia de Tela Bay, you know, and because Snyder also was leading a fight to comply with the sentence of the Inter-American Court of Human Rights that condemned the Honduras state in 2015 for violating Garifuna right to territorial, violating Garifuna right for consultation, for right to even right to judicial guarantee. You know, what I'm saying here that the Inter-American Court ordered the state to return the stolen land to the Garifuna community of Triunfo de la Cruz. They were, Snyder, president of the community of Triunfo de la Cruz, was leading this kind of fight to return the stolen land of our community to the community of Triunfo de la Cruz. I would like to go a little bit about who is the responsible for this, I call here, third expulsion, as our people, as our communities call it. Who is the responsible for this genocidal plan against our people? We can affirm that this aggression against the Garifuna community escalated even more after 2015 Inter-American Court human rights ruling declared that the Honduras state violated this, the Convention of Human Rights by the state by refusing to recognize and respect the autonomy of our people, of the autonomy of ancestral Garifuna land, and they brutalize the communities when that community are trying to protect their land, our land. That ruling, as I said earlier, demanded the Honduras state must expropriate land that have been taken by outsiders that for massive tourist project or to return it to rightful owner as our community. I would say also that in these years after the ruling, OFRANEH continued to denounce that this illegal acquisition of land by Canadian, for example, Trujillo Bay, Bahia de Trujillo, transnational, also by transnational capital investor and Honduran group in power, including the president of Honduras, former president from Honduras too. I think it has been nearly 5 years and the Honduras state still hasn't complied with that ruling. Instead, he has activated and coordinated with criminal structure to disappear, to prosecute, and to murder Garifuna leaders. As we said in Triunfo de la Cruz, for example, the police act as criminal and not the criminal acting, was the police acting as criminal, but not the criminal acting as police. That means that this disappearance, this forced disappearance of our people, this attack, this horror against and genocidal plan against our Garifuna people is planned again by the state force, including all the institutions of the Honduras state. That we say that Honduras state, the state of has systematically and permanently implemented this kind of way because they are trying to deny, even they deny that the Garifuna, the indigenous condition of the Garifuna people as part of this policy, that part of this policy of disposition, extermination, and genocide. I remember in the trial before the Inter-American Court on Human Rights in Costa Rica in 2015, the state said, the Garifuna community is not a community originating in Honduras of the region. They are saying that therefore it cannot be considered as indigenous people, and then due to that fact they are not indigenous people, they can invoke the right to ancestral land. That was the state. That was the voice for the state, the rhetoric of the state to deny this Garifuna indigenous condition of the Garifuna people, just to deny the right, our right to land. This has not only triggered the emptying our community space, but also encouraging a series of criminal attacks. That is why I'm saying that the man responsible for this selective murder and for disappearing of the Garifuna people is the state, Honduras state. I'm like finishing, concluding this, my statement here, but what happened, and also I came with this responsible, there is a more institution who is responsible beside the state for this plan, for this disappearance, for this expulsion of our people. We can say that there are 3 specific groups responsible for this oppression against our people. So we need to act now. We need to act against these groups. The first is the state. I have talked a little bit about it. The groups in powers, like palmeros, like drug trafficking businessmen, you know. And the third group, I call it as a group, but it's a country that we are now, is the United States of America. Because the thing is, because the United States, the government of the United States is giving money to Honduras. It backing the corrupt government, corrupt and narco-state government of Honduras. It's giving money to Juan Orlando. The Juan Orlando is even a illegal president because he has been re-elected against our constitution. Our constitution, Honduras constitution, doesn't allow the re-election. He's in power. He's there because the United States is giving him different kind of money, you know, backing him in this time. That is why I think they must, as talking about the United States, they must assume that responsibility. They must hold we can hold it accountable for this, because when you give money to a criminal, you are not an accomplice, but you are a criminal too. When you're giving money, you are not an accomplice, you are a criminal too. That they must allow to live our community in peace. There is nothing more than living in that way what we want. We live our community in the way we want as Garifuna people. And the final talk here, I would say I have like a message. I have a final message, but a message for those who want to expel, who want to destroy, and who want to exterminate the Garifuna people, who want to exterminate these people, our people. I would say to them that we are tired. That we are tired, and we want them to stop your death policy. They can just stop their genocidal plan, stop their extermination project against our community, and to stop the campaign of terror against Garifuna people. We demand that the state of Honduras return our brothers from Triunfo de la Cruz alive, just as they were taken from the community. We are not stopping until they are returned and the perpetrators are brought to justice. We firmly believe that they are alive and we want them back alive. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rony. It sounds to me like we need to organize the campaign of solidarity to release the 4 people that were kidnapped and to support the Garifuna community. So thank you so much, Rony. And we will be in touch. And I think that it is certainly reasonable that among the 41 people that join us today, some will be interested to work with us on a campaign for these 2 purposes. So thank you. And next speaker will be Karen Spring, who is speaking to us from Honduras. Go ahead, Karen. You are muted.
I'm still muted. Am I unmuted now?
Yes, now you're good.
Okay, okay. So thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you so much to MAPA and to the Latin American Solidarity Coalition for organizing this event. As you mentioned, my name is Karen Spring, and I am the Honduras-based coordinator for the Honduras Solidarity Network, which is a network of over 30 organizations from Canada and the United States that focus on the role of the United States and Canada in Honduras. I've lived in Honduras for over 11 years, and some of you know a little bit about my work. Some of you have followed the case of my spouse, Edwin Espinal, who was imprisoned in a maximum security prison for 1.5 years, and as a result of protesting the illegal re-election of Juan Orlando Hernández that Rony mentioned in his amazing summary that fit almost all of the really important details related to the Garifuna people in his talk. And so before I start, I wanted to thank everybody in this group, these two organizations, for basically supporting the campaign to free Edwin and to free the political prisoners in Honduras. We were able to achieve the release of all the people that were imprisoned as a result of the election. We still have to fight for the release of other political prisoners that are in prison now here, as well as the appearance and the return of the Garifuna leaders that were forcefully disappeared by the Honduran government. So thank you so much for everybody that's on this call that supported that campaign. So I'm calling you from Tegucigalpa, which means that there's no such thing as silence in any Latin American city. So you will probably hear dogs barking and fumigation, like motors in the street. So I apologize for any noise. So today I want to talk a little bit about what Rony touched on at the end of his talk. And I want to focus on the role of international interests and international the international role in what is happening in Honduras, and specifically with the Garifuna communities. I've had the honor of working closely with OFRANEH for many years, and also I've spent most of my time in Trujillo Bay, where there is significant interest, Canadian interest, to displace and steal ancestral Garifuna land. And Trujillo Bay is one of the 2 beautiful bays on the North Caribbean coast of Honduras. And I see there's a question in the chat about Randy Jorgensen, who's the Canadian that is basically been leading the so-called developments in Trujillo Bay that's leading to the expulsion of Garifuna communities there. And so as far as Randy Jorgensen's concerned, I don't think his cruise ship port is doing very well. I don't think tourists liked his cruise ship very much, but there's still lots of outstanding land issues that the Garifuna continue to mobilize around. There's a lot of Garifuna youth that are doing land reclamations and that are basically taking back their land that's been taken from them, from Canadians, from Americans, and from Europeans that are building their own tourist homes, basically in Trujillo Bay. So basically, I want to start by talking a little bit about the land issues that Rony started talking about and where the US fits in those land interests. And for me, in the many years that I've worked in Honduras, I feel like land issues always come back to a couple of institutions that are basically what I would call the masterminds or the intellectual authors of the displacement of the Garifuna people. And I would start by saying that that is the World Bank, and it's the International Monetary Fund, and it's the Inter-American Development Bank. And the reason I say this is because these international financial institutions, they've always been very evil, but they've always tried to make themselves look like they're doing great work in the so-called developing world. But in fact, that's very much a lie. And a lot of the issues that we had with these international financial institutions in the 80s through the structural adjustment programs continue today. And so the reason I say that they're the intellectual authors, the masterminds of the displacement of the Garifuna people, is because the World Bank has funded for several decades these land titling processes that are slowly eroding the ancestral land titles of the Garifuna along the entire north coast of Honduras. And I've spent most of my time, like I mentioned, in Trujillo Bay, as the coordinator for the Honduras Solidarity Network, to answer the question in the chat. And what has happened is, I'm going to give an example of one Garifuna community. So there's a Garifuna community on the far western part of Trujillo Bay, and it's called Guadalupe. So the small community, Garifuna community of Guadalupe. And Guadalupe has this ancestral land title that's shared with 2 other Garifuna communities from one river all the way to the extension, the peninsula that extends into the Caribbean Sea. And so what happens is the World Bank, a lot of the decisions that the World Bank makes comes from and originates from Washington, D.C. because of the power that the United States government has in the World Bank, and the funding that the United States gives to the World Bank. And so the World Bank comes along and says, you know what, we're gonna title land in these Garifuna communities. And then the Garifuna say, yeah, but we have title already. We have ancestral land titles that date back to the mid-1800s to the late 1800s. We don't need land titles. We already have a land title. But the World Bank says, you know, we're going to title your land here. So we're going to ignore the fact that you have all this extension of land. You have all of this historical knowledge and elderly and knowledge that's passed down through families and generations, that you've been farming this land and taking care of this land, and you have titles to this land since the 1800s. And we're going to title the land just where you have your houses. And we're going to ignore the fact that you've been farming the entire area along the North Coast, and you've fought off the banana companies for decades and decades. And so we're going to only title you this small piece of land. And the World Bank basically gives all this money to the Honduran government, and they fund these programs where they're eroding these ancestral titles. And the reason that they're titling is because in order to privatize natural resources, in order to build your resorts and your cruise ship docks, you need to have private land titles to attract foreign investors. But if you have ancestral land titles that the Garifuna own, that's not convenient for the neoliberal development model that's being promoted by the international financial institutions. And so the IFIs play a huge role in the displacement of the Garifuna people. And obviously that's mastermind from DC and from the global north. And so I think that we have a lot of work to do on stopping those neoliberal development policies that are promoted and that are mastermind in the United States. The second way I wanted to talk, or the second thing I wanted to talk about the US role, and there's just so many things. Rony mentioned the political support for the government from the US government, and I would add from the Canadian government. I'm Canadian, and the Canadians are just like the Americans. We just don't have the same amount of money and the same military might, but we support Juan Orlando Hernández as well. And we supported and propped up the illegal re-election of Juan Orlando Hernández. But the United States government is just so deeply involved in Honduras. And basically, so many people believe, just like Rony said, that Juan Orlando Hernández would not be in power without the support of the United States government and the United States military. But one of the things I wanted to specifically mention is that the role, for example, that the FBI play in Honduras. And this links specifically to the disappearance on July 18th that Rony mentioned, of these 5 men from the community of Triunfo de la Cruz, where at early hours of the morning, they were taken out of their home, arrested, handcuffed by Honduran police with the initials DPI on their vests that they were wearing. And DPI stands for the Police Investigative Directorate, which is a relatively new post-coup police force in Honduras. And the FBI has given direct training to the DPI. And so the DPI were these men that broke into the homes and that forcefully disappeared these Garifuna leaders, have been directly trained by the FBI. And it seems that, you know, this is another reminder that the United States government is so deeply involved in human rights issues in Honduras, that this, you know, training that the FBI gives to the DPI, and then the DPI forcefully disappearing land defenders and very vocal land defenders and Garifuna in very peaceful Garifuna communities, is just another like micro example of the problematic nature of the United States support for the Honduran state and Honduran military and the Honduran police. And so, you know, the FBI has been involved in another investigative unit. They send down Chicago police officers to train local Honduran investigative bodies, for example, in the really conflictive region of the Bajo Aguan, or the lower Aguan Valley, where over 150 campesinos or small farmers have been murdered over African palm, fighting large African palm companies and interests that are again funded by the World Bank, that again created by the land conflicts that are generated by the World Bank's land titling policies. And so the FBI has also been involved. You know, the United States government sent two private detectives that were originally thought to be involved with the FBI, but that were not, in fact, but they are still these private police detectives coming from these big US cities, Chicago and I think LA, and they're coming down, and they were involved in the immediate aftermath of investigating the murder of Berta Cáceres, the very well-known environmentalist that was murdered in 2016, that was very much supportive of OFRANEH and worked alongside the Garifuna communities with her organization, her indigenous organization called Coup. And so the FBI was also involved. Or US investigators were also involved in the cover-up of the corporate interests that were behind Berta Cáceres' murder. And so again, it's coming back to these small, tiny examples of the FBI, but then it's such a good micro example of the really problematic nature of the United States. And so who is in charge now of investigating these forced disappearances of the Garifuna people? Well, it's the DPI. And so you have these Honduran police units that are trained by the FBI to carry out investigations that are going in and kidnapping, forcefully disappearing Garifuna leaders. And then now they're in charge of investigating the same crime that they're accused of committing, basically. And so, and obviously another unit that's responsible for investigating these forced disappearances, which have sent a chill through the entire country here. People are terrified. They see what has happened to these 5 Garifuna leaders, where they're taken out of their homes and arrested, and nobody knows anything about them, you know, for several months after. It's created this very terrifying environment for land defenders, environmentalists, journalists, and lawyers all across the country. And so another investigative unit that's responsible for investigating, that has a link to the United States as well, is the Attorney General's Office, the Honduran Attorney General's Office. And so I just wanted to give an example of the US support for this Attorney General's Office. So on September 28th, which I guess was 2 days ago, the US Embassy in Tegucigalpa tweeted, quote, "We spoke with Attorney General Chinchilla, the Honduran Attorney General, about human rights cases and efforts to combat corruption. We support the Attorney General and the Attorney General's Office in their work to strengthen Honduran institutions and the rule of law in Honduras," unquote. I mean, these kinds of tweets are outrageous. And they're outrageous because you have, the Honduran authorities have been saying that they're investigating the forced disappearances of these Garifuna men, and absolutely nothing has been shared with OFRANEH or with the community of Triunfo de la Cruz and the family members of these men. And you know, this is the same Attorney General's Office that has maintained a 90+% impunity rate, that it continues to worsen every year and has worsened every year since the 2009 coup d'etat in Honduras. And that has done absolutely nothing in this COVID-19 crisis, where there have been so many complaints about billions of dollars of public money that's been stolen by the government, that is supposed to be responding to the COVID-19 crisis, but that hasn't. And so this tweet by the US Embassy is outrageous. And it's so clear that it doesn't matter what the Honduran government does, that the United States government will keep supporting this government of Honduras. And that's not even to mention that this is a mafia narco state. Honduran president was named as a co-conspirator in a large-scale drug trafficking case in New York courts. His brother is waiting a 40+ year sentence for trafficking hundreds of kilos of cocaine into the United States, and he's waiting sentencing in New York as we speak. And the more you know about the Honduran government, the more the idea of the mafia state makes sense. So the same mafia that is controlling the government is the same mafia that's controlling the Congress. It's the same mafia that's building and has alliances with the World Bank and the Canadians and the Americans that are building the hotels and the cruise ship docks inside Garifuna ancestral titles on the North Coast. It's the same mafia that is building hydroelectric dams and basically plotting murders of environmentalists and land defenders. But yet the United States government stands strong behind Juan Orlando Hernández. And this is obviously, there's a 10-year plus track record of Honduras being the most dangerous place for environmentalists, one of the most dangerous countries in the world for environmentalists, for land defenders, for journalists, for lawyers, etc. I mean, the list goes on and on. I mean, just to conclude my talk and pass it to Adrian, I know I'm getting at my time limit. So this is a really timely discussion because, I mean, I'm sure everybody that could tolerate it watched the first presidential debate last night. And we're not going to get into any discussion about it because, you know, it'll probably get heated. But I just wanted to say that it's such an important time to recognize that, you know, we have two presidential candidates in the United States that have horrible track records on Honduras. It doesn't matter if the Republicans are in power or the Democrats are in power. In the United States, US foreign policy has stayed consistent in Honduras. And we've seen that as Honduras has spiraled more and more into a drug state, more and more into a human rights crisis like throughout the entire country. And so Biden has a horrible track record in Honduras. He put through the Biden plan, which led to this privatization of several state bodies such as the National Electrical Energy Company and others. And then you have Trump that basically, you know, promoted this extremely racist attack against Hondurans and migrant caravans and people that were fleeing the same conditions that the United States was creating in Honduras, making people make these extremely difficult decisions to make that horrible trip up to the US and Mexico border. So I think that it's a time where we need to say both candidates are awful on Honduras, which means we need to go for long-term structural changes. And I think it's a good time too, because the Elliot Engels, who was the congressman that basically chaired the House Committee for Foreign Affairs, he was not reelected. And so Nancy Pelosi will be having to pick a new chair, Democratic chair, in January. And so I think that's a really good place. We need to be pushing the Democratic Party to talk about, and the Republicans, but they're kind of a lost cause in many ways, the Democratic Party to pick a good person that is that has a better foreign policy proposals than what has existed in the past. So I'm going to leave that there and pass it on to Adrian. And again, thank everybody for joining us tonight and for giving me the opportunity to speak with Rony and with Adrian. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you very much. It was very interesting, very, very interesting and serious. So, Adrian, take it from there.
Okay, well, thank you. And I'm so glad that Rony and Karen gave such fantastic presentations, in part because I have a cold and my voice hurts and there's very little to fill in after that. Excuse me. But also because, you know, they're really right now so immediately involved in all of these struggles. So I'm glad that their voices were highlighted. I guess there were just a couple things that that I wanted to bring up, and I think these are more sort of suggestions for the Q&A segment than something that I want to talk on at length. But part of you know, what's so really incredible about the Garifuna community is how powerfully it has resisted the kind of violence that it has been subject to at the hands of the Honduran state, but you know, as Rony and Karen have laid out in great detail, also the US sort of capitalist imperialist plans and the international financial institutions that the US largely controls. And I wanted, sorry, before I veer off onto another point, and I think that's part of obviously why the Garifuna community is being targeted in this genocidal way, because they have been so effective at protecting their lands. And also the Garifuna community, because it has been so really dramatically excluded from the sort of any quote unquote benefits of the state project of Honduras, whether that we're talking about infrastructure, education, healthcare. It has been really creative in finding other allies, and so many Garifuna people have worked closely with Cubans, for example, in the creation of the first hospital, the first Garifuna hospital in Siriboya. There had, you know, in what was there had been, over the course of the entire history of the medical school at the National Autonomous University of Honduras, I think there had been about as many doctors as you could count on your hand trained who were Garifuna. And I don't know the exact number, but I believe it's over 100 doctors who were trained in the past 10 or 12 years at the Latin American School of Medicine in Cuba. And so there's been this real project of solidarity and sort of revolutionary solidarity that the Garifuna people have had to and enthusiastically engaged in order to support their own communities, in order to create their own healthcare centers and educational opportunities, because they were denied those by the Honduran state. And, you know, when Berta Cáceres was murdered, Jim Kim, who is an anthropologist and doctor, and Dr. Paul Farmer's frequent co-author, and who happened to be president of the World Bank at the time that she was murdered, he said, well, when you have progress, things like this happen sometimes. Just to give you a sense of like how devalued just incredible indigenous leaders are, their lives, how little they matter in sort of compared to the interests of financial capital, and how specifically they are, you know, really seen as sort of necessary exchanges for extractive capitalism. Like, it's, well, you need some people to get killed, and that's just sort of a given. And so I think that the powerful resistance that Garifuna people have had, that OFRANEH has led, just as Copin really led and continues to lead such, you know, such an incredible struggle against this kind of extractive capital, also fits into a larger kind of geopolitical arena, because you know, Biden and Trump have really been competing to see which one can be more like inhumane and harsh vis-a-vis Cuba and Venezuela. And in fact, there was recently Mauricio Claver Caron, who's a really like hardcore right-wing Cuban, anti-Cuban American, was just appointed to be the head of the Inter-American Development Bank. All of this sort of the identification internationally and with the international financial institutions of Garifuna people as revolutionaries, as allied with Cuba, as resistors, makes them targets for a whole variety of reasons, not just because of, you know, the profits that they see in those lands that they're stealing from people, but also ideologically. So I think, you know, because they've been such an incredible, the Garifuna people and OFRANEH in particular have given us such incredible models of resisting the just unthinkable violence of the Honduran state, which has come down on them harder than on most other communities in Honduras. I think it's incumbent upon us to really find ways to be very strongly and solidly in solidarity with OFRANEH in this terrifying moment that the Garifuna people are going through. And I think that's all I need to say for now. I think we can open it to questions because we've taken the hour.
Thank you very much, Adrian. I did not know about the revolutionary aspect of the struggle of the Garifuna people. So I think that we need to, Karen, I'm sure that you, through the Honduras Solidarity Network, is organizing a national or international campaign for the release of the Garifuna leaders and to end the dispossession of land. Maybe you can tell us how we can assist this campaign, how we can get involved in this campaign, because somebody wrote in the chat that this is just like Palestine. The motivation is different. In Palestine, it's a national rather than business motivation, but in terms of dispossession and the cruelty and the suffering of the Palestinian and the Garifuna people, yes, there are similarities. So Karen, if you can tell us how we can get involved, that will be great. And then we can go to questions. If you want to ask a question, you can select the participant button and raise your hands, and Brian Gravy will put the camera on you. You can also use the chat to send us a question, and we will share it with the fantastic speakers that we have here. So Karen, maybe you can say a few words about the campaign, and then we'll go to questions. You are
doesn't like me.
Okay, good. No, we cannot hear you.
Now?
Now we can hear you.
Okay.
Great.
I don't know what's going on. I think there's like somebody working behind the scenes, unmuting, and anyways. So yes, so the Honduras Solidarity Network had several campaigns, and the immediate very much took the lead of OFRANEH in these actions, and we do everything basically coordinating with OFRANEH, but recognizing that our role is slightly different because our aim is not just the Canadian and US, well, our primary aim is the Canadian and US government. But we also, because of the urgency of the situation, we had actions to pressure Honduran authorities because it was such an urgent issue, and the communities all across the Caribbean coast of Honduras were mobilizing and were demanding that they still are demanding that they be returned alive. So we don't have any immediate actions in this moment. We're waiting for direction from OFRANEH, which I know Rony is very involved in with a lot of the campaigning. There's actually, OFRANEH has an international outreach person based in New York. Her name is Carla Garcia. She's a Garifuna woman. And so we've been trying to coordinate more actions with her. What I can do is, I'll pass it to Rony in case he knows of any upcoming campaigns that you guys can get involved in. But what I will promise to do is that there will be more actions. And the HSN will be announcing more, coordinated again with OFRANEH, and I commit to letting you know and letting your group know when those happen. We like to do really big pushes, so we've been able to be quite successful in our campaigns. We can sometimes get several thousand emails sent to Honduran authorities to push them on these issues. So I'll pass it to Rony. He might have better information than I do, but I do commit to passing anything on when we do organize something.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, what we are doing now, we are trying to organize a international committee to to do research about where to find our people, to find our brothers from Triunfo de la Cruz. Now we are like socializing this proposal to give it to Honduras government and to create a autonomous corp of investigation, a group of investigation or research to find our people, but also to pressure the Honduras government, because who have been in charge of this investigation of is the same police who took our brother from their home from Triunfo de la Cruz community. And now what we need is to create an independent, autonomous group to investigate this case and to bring justice to our community and to find our people alive or dead, but the family, our people, our OFRANEH believe that they are still alive because they were taken by the police. When the police disappear people, those people can last for long time alive. That is, we are we like pushing to find them alive. That we are doing now. And also we are protesting in Honduras, but here in the United States, maybe it will be fine for people, for our allies, to pressure the senator, the congressmen and congresswomen to send some letter that would be important to send letter to the to Honduras government, because as Karen and Adrian said, Honduras government, Juan Orlando, is supported for this government because even the Congress here in the United States, the representative is giving money to this. They are training the police in Honduras. They are giving in project in different way. Maybe we can do something to get awareness of what is happening here in Honduras to people who are like paying taxes here in the United States. Maybe the support of you as United States citizen will be great, very even more if you can raise your voice as you are. Some of you are doing that just to support our action as OFRANEH in Honduras.
Okay, we will be in touch, Rony, and yes, we would like to do it. So thank you again to the speakers, and now let's open for the questions. So if you raise your hands, I will call your name so that you can ask a question. Or if you write the question in the chat, that will also be okay. Well, there is a question. There are two questions. The first question was, what is OFRANEH and what does it represent, and how and to what extent have the Garifuna communities outside of Honduras have been campaigning for the return of the disappeared leaders from Triunfo? So maybe somebody can tell us a little bit more about the organization of OFRANEH.
Yeah, maybe I can talk a little bit more about OFRANEH. We are creating a link with another Garifuna community, because we have Garifuna people in Guatemala, in Belize, in Nicaragua, and in the United States too. Even in St. Vincent, we are coordinating efforts also with the government of St. Vincent and Grenadines in the Caribbean country, to how to pressure our not just to find our people alive, but also to stop this plan, this this genocidal plan, this displacement, this project of against this terror against our people, because as I said earlier, we have a lot of people that have been murdered in Honduras, Garifuna leaders, not just those 5 brothers that have been kidnapped from Triunfo de la Cruz, but also more than 40 people have been murdered since 2019. So that we, maybe to answer this question, in Central America, we are we are working outside of Central America. We are working in the United States with, as Karen says, in New York City, we have a OFRANEH representative. Also, we have other brother and sister who are working from Europe to go to United Nations, also to pressure from there. Yeah, we are like trying to make a coalition from Europe, United States, mainly from Europe and United States. We also want to go to Washington City to the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights in there, because they are also, they can send more pressure to Honduras state to stop this campaign against our Garifuna people.
If I could jump in too, one of the things that I think was, one of the things that, well, that happened this summer, as the compañeros were disappeared in mid-July, this came at the same time that people were rising up in the streets in the Black Lives Matter protests here in the United States. And while the historical and sort of contextual situations are very different between the, what the Garifuna people are going through and what the what Black people in the United States, the kind of genocidal policies that have been levied against Black people in the United States, there are nonetheless some really important structural differences that a lot of Garifuna leaders were highlighting in that time, because they really stood out so much. So if you think about the processes in the United States of urban redevelopment, of redlining, of the destruction of coherent and cohesive Black communities in order for people to, the capitalists to take advantage of the real estate that they were on, the terrorization of those communities, and the murdering, the disappearing of Black people in the United States. There were some really powerful parallels that that I saw drawn in like various webinars that were in Spanish, that were led by different Garifuna activists. There was they were using the slogan "Garifuna Lives Matter" as well, obviously, like making that connection. And I think it's really important to look at those connections. Barbara is writing me that our police force in the U.S. Were trained in Israel, and that is also really important. Of course, the Honduran police force receives a great deal of training both from Israel formally and from private Israeli companies that are run by former Mossad, etc. So there's real serious structural similarities in terms of what's going on in both countries, again, without conflating the two situations. I think it's important for us to see those and to understand how we're all tied into this. We're all tied into this struggle and inserted at different levels of power and privilege, right? I mean, this is not something that is impacting me in the way that it would impact a Black person in the United States in any way, but I'm definitely much more closely connected to it here in the United States, as opposed to like thinking that, oh, this is something that's going on over there in Honduras. And so I think connecting those struggles to fight against that kind of racist structural racial capitalism and the violence it entails requires us to do that both here and in Honduras in the same ways, and to look for those connections.
Okay, I see. Thank you, Adrian. I see there is a question from Zenaida.
Hi, Zenaida.
Zenaida.
Hi, Adrian and Karen. Yeah, I have, unfortunately, I have an experience from the 80s when they first applied this policy that is certainly the doctrine of national security. This is the creation of this policy that inflicts fear and terror in the population. So that's what they want, to paralyze the Garifunas communities, that they don't say anything, that they don't protest for anything. And this doctrine is created by the Pentagon in the United States. So we have to focus on that. And unfortunately, we have this situation of the pandemic, but if we were able to put pressure on some Congress representatives or senators and authorities from the United States, they are the ones that have created this policy. And I have to say that the application of the disappearances appears to me that this is the same thing right now. They are disappearing these compañeros, these brothers, and it is just to paralyze the communities, that they don't say anything, that they don't protest. And so I don't know what to say, but it is that the pressure has to be over the United States government. See, for example, that Twitter that Karen mentioned, the support from the American embassy is so clear, and they know all of this, and they probably gave the okay, moved the flag for the application of this type of practice, this policy. So I don't know what to do, but we don't have to lose focus on putting pressure on both governments, the United States governments and the Canadian government too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, and I think you're right. It is a campaign of intimidation for the whole Garifuna community and for the whole Honduras, the country of Honduras.
Yeah.
There's another question from Taylor. The question is, when contacting US politicians on these disappearances, does it make sense to also push the Beretta Cáceres Act to stop US military aid and training to Honduras?
Witness for Peace as an organization has been really involved in the Berta Cáceres Act. And so I think the question is a good one to mention something that's important for people to know. So the question is making reference to the Berta Cáceres Act, which is a law that for several years has been presented by several congressional representatives. And it's every time there's an election, they have to reintroduce it. And it's asking for the suspension of US military aid and training to Honduras. But it also, for me, one of the most important parts of that law as well, it's asking for the United States government, the US Treasury, to stop funding the international financial institutions as well, which I made mention of why that is important as well. So yes, I do think that it is very important. Brian just posted the link in the chat if people want to read it. There's been several letters from Congress, from congressional representatives that have come out raising concerns. If people are interested in contacting their congressional representatives, I would ask their offices if they've signed on to any letters related to human rights issues in Honduras. There was a pretty big letter that I think had 14 signers Congress representatives signed on to that highlighted the issue of the appearances of the 4 Garifuna leaders from Triunfo de la Cruz in July. But yes, the Berta Cáceres Act is important to mention. It's important to know if your representative is signed on to it, which I'm sure some of you already would know that. And to talk about why US military aid and training is so problematic, and that's really feeding the beast in Honduras, that is generating all these problems for land defenders and journalists and the Garifuna people that are fighting for their land. So thank you for that question. It's really important. I just got another question privately, which I think is really important, if it's okay if I mention it. So I was asked if the US military is in Honduras. Yes, so the US military is very much in Honduras, permanently actually. Honduras is home to the largest US military base in the region. It's called Sotocano or Palmarola. And I think in 2009, I don't know recent numbers, at any time in 2009, there were 500 to 600 US troops on that base. I would say there's much more. There's also private contractors, private US contractors that are also based there. And that's not the only place where they are. I mean, the United States has used the so-called fight against maintain a presence all over the country. And as we know from what I just mentioned, the Honduran president is so involved in drug trafficking, so they're clearly not fighting drug trafficking. Otherwise, the president wouldn't be involved in drug trafficking himself. And the United States military would have, if they were actually fighting drug trafficking, they probably would have done something about the president's brother trafficking cocaine to the United States in large numbers. So they're very much present, not just in the US military base that's an hour and a half north of where I'm sitting in the city of Comayagua. They're all over the country. They're in forward operating bases. And it's not just the military, there's the DEA, there's the FBI, and there's several special forces, special Honduran military forces that have permanent accompaniment from US military. I think the Green Berets have been here. Several special forces have been in different parts of the country, and they're usually in the parts where there's a lot of conflict, a lot of land conflicts. In fact, they're very present in close to Trujillo Bay, where the Garifuna are undergoing significant land struggles from Canadians and Americans that are stealing land for mining, energy projects, tourist projects. And so, yeah, the Honduran military, or the US military, is very present in Honduras and has maintained that presence and has grown that presence significantly since the 2009 coup. So thank you for that question. It's very important and it wasn't mentioned.
Okay, thank you. There's another question from Alba Oliver. Do you think the 4 Garifunas that were kidnapped are being tortured for information? And where do you believe they are being held? In Honduras or somewhere like Guantanamo Bay? Do you have any information about the 4 leaders? Any information? What do their families know anything? Or
we don't have too much information about them, but as we know, Snyder, that he is like a president of the community, of the Triunfo de la Cruz community. He was fighting against those groups, against the state to obey and comply the 2015 court ruling, Inter-American Court of Human Rights ruling in favor of the Garifuna of Triunfo de la Cruz, which would have reversed and maybe this destruction, this this pressure against the community of Triunfo de la Cruz is related to the 2015 court ruling against the state. And also, Snyder, in February this year, Snyder Centeno traveled to Tegucigalpa, capital city of Honduras, to meet with Carla Cuevas. Carla Cuevas is a Honduras Minister of Human Rights, in which he raised his concern about the increasing of this kind of violence against the community of Triunfo de la Cruz. And Centeno during that meeting also expressed he was worried about his safety because he was previously reported being afraid of his life to local authority because he got different kind of message threatening his life. The main point here is a territorial, is related to territory, related to this fight of territory. That the message here is that they don't want the community to push for this 2015 court ruling because it's implied different too much money that they can give back to the community of Triunfo de la Cruz. I think this is a main point here. That is the reason they disappeared there.
We don't have to forget that Juan Orlando is the commander of the armed forces, and the order probably came from him.
Yes.
And he obeys orders from the American embassy. So it is so sad, but it's...
You are right. You are right. And what you said earlier related to ese defense, national doctrine, this
national security.
National security, yeah, is the same pattern that they're using with our people, with this disappearance here in Triunfo de la Cruz. Because first, the state said that they don't know nothing about them. They are denying every investigation. They are denying everything, and they don't talk with their family of the people, disappeared people. They don't talk. They are, they are like doing this just to stop to terrorize our people, terrorize those communities, and they can stop protesting for their rights, for these territorial rights.
It was the same experience. It's the same experience as in the 1980s, unfortunately.
There is another question here from Raquel Boleto in Spanish, and since I do not read Spanish, I cannot read the question. In the meantime, there is also a question that I can read from Richard Krushnik, and the question is, has the Honduran situation affected the Garifuna in Belize?
Yeah, I think I can talk a little bit about. I think the Garifuna situation in Guatemala, in Belize, in Nicaragua, even in another countries. Yeah, this message is for all Garifuna people, because I think it's a little bit different in Belize. When Belize, they are not pushing too much for their territorial lands, but will be an opportunity because maybe this can be used as for whatever state, for Guatemala state, for example, for Belize, for whatever state, just to dispossess our Garifuna people. And as we know, in this particular case, the Belize government and St. Vincent government had been two governments that had sent some letter to Juan Orlando saying, be careful with the Garifuna people, protect the Garifuna people rights, and we have Garifuna here also, and we want them to be to live in peace in their territory. Maybe they are not too much treated in Belize, but Guatemala will be also a target for their territorial rights there. Talking about Raquel question, me gustaría saber qué ha hecho el Estado de Honduras para cumplir con esta sentencia. Yeah, Raquel is talking about what the Honduras state do to comply with the 2015 ruling, this Inter-American Court ruling against the state of Honduras. Honduras nothing has been done related to that. That is why the state is pressuring our community. That is why the state is taking those leaders, community leaders, the leader of the patronatos, what we call the president of the community, because they hold the titles of each community. They are like the main, you know, authority in each communities, like to protect their territory, ancestral title to their land. That is why the state doesn't want to comply with this court ruling, and instead the state is trying to pressure our community to abandon their territory and to go to the United States, to migrate to the Europe, to migrate to another country, and leave these spaces for the state, for their projects, for their cities, charter city projects, even extractivist projects.
Thank you very much, Rony. It's time for us to end, but Taylor is mentioning here that there is a great book on the forces involved in the current Honduran narco police state in the book with the title Who Killed Berta Cáceres by Nina Lacani, which is published by Verso in 2020. So I will end here, but before I end, I again would like to invite you all to join MAPA, to join the work of the Latin America Solidarity Coalition of Western Mass, and we together with Rony and Kevin and Adrian will get involved in a campaign to support the Garifuna people. So again, I want to thank everybody, especially the speakers. I thought it was very, very interesting, very, very good. And I'm looking forward to see you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for this support. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Rony.
Thanks, Rony.
Thanks.
Adios, Zenaida.
Thank you, everybody. Talks to you all. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.